on 3 felony gun charges related to the purchase of a gun in 2018. Here to explain more is Jon-Jorge Aras. He is the founder of Aras Law Group. Jon-Jorge, thank you so much for joining us. I want to start by asking, are you surprised by today's verdict?
I don't think I'm surprised by today's verdict because the evidence in this case was fairly straightforward. It was Hunter Biden having lied on an application to purchase a firearm and then possessing that firearm afterwards. The prosecution's case was pretty clean and pretty straightforward, and the jury only took about 3 hours to deliberate, which is usually a clear sign that the evidence was put in a manner that made a lot of sense. The defense tried to go for sort of an omnibus approach and really narrow what this case was about when it came down to the question on the gun application and whether Hunter Biden at that time was sober or not sober. But it seems like the evidence was overwhelming. I'm not surprised that on the 3 counts, 2 of them being making false statements in the connection with purchasing a firearm, and the third thereby illegally possessing the firearm afterwards, that the jury came back with this conviction.
Let's just break down these 3 convictions. What exactly do they mean? And what exactly are the convictions?
So the conviction, the first one is making a false statement in regards to a question on an application, whether or not at the time of the purchase of the firearm, Hunter Biden was addicted or on any drugs at that time. So that was the first 2 counts are connected. They're both false statements in connection with purchasing the gun. So it's the transaction record, and then it's the false statement itself. Those are the first 2. And then the third is just simply then illegally possessing that firearm by virtue of having lied on this application and therefore obtaining it illegally. Because at the time the testimony and the evidence came out of the case that Hunter Biden was suffering from a drug addiction during that time.
Now, will Hunter Biden appeal these charges?
I believe his counsel will. We're in a very interesting territory with this case. And the charges in this case are not, I wouldn't say they're very typical. I would say that they're somewhat unique, that this case was brought and went down this road leading to this conviction. But underlying all of this is a Second Amendment issue. And whether the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, can be invoked in this situation. And the argument, one of the arguments, or I should say the main argument, is that an individual that is potentially suffering from a drug addiction may still be able to invoke the Second Amendment and say, this is disparate and unequal treatment of me, a potential drug addict, and I should still be allowed to purchase a firearm. So it is setting up an appeal. The Supreme Court has not heard this issue, and I believe this case will proceed forward, and I believe that Hunter Biden's counsel will go down that road, and it's very possible this could end up at some point before the Supreme Court.
So just to emphasize what you just said, Hunter Biden could appeal using the Second Amendment, and that appeal could go all the way to the Supreme Court?
That's correct. Yeah, this is an issue that has not been decided by the Supreme Court. Something to compare it to would be an individual that may be suffering from mental illness, right? Can they invoke the Second Amendment to purchase a firearm? It's somewhat in the same world, and there's arguments to be made that the Second Amendment has its strengths, and this could lead to a point that strengthens gun laws, provided what the Supreme Court comes down ultimately with their decision regarding the Second Amendment. So yes, this could end up before the Supreme Court.
I mean, it's interesting. If you think about it, someone who has been diagnosed with a mental health disorder, they still have the right to the First Amendment, free speech. So you can kind of maybe start to see the legal framework that could be used in a case at the Supreme Court.
The Constitution is strong. The amendments are strong. People have individual rights and liberties, and those are protected by the Constitution. So these are the foundation, and you laid it out correctly. It's the foundation for these types of arguments to proceed forward.
It's just politically interesting because what you're describing almost sounds like it sets up a situation for the son of a president to strengthen the Second Amendment when that president himself wants to tighten gun laws. Is that a fair summation of where we are politically?
I think broadly that's accurate. The president has been clear about wanting to tighten gun laws and to restrict certain rights to purchasing firearms. This case is a piece of that, a portion of it that could add itself to strengthening gun laws or the liberty and the individual right to purchase a firearm. So it is an interesting juxtaposition that's been set up between the two. I'm sure, obviously, on a personal level, I'm sure that the president and the first lady are upset about this decision. And I do think that there's a level of empathy that everyone can have for Hunter Biden having suffered through a drug addiction and being in this position. It's the president has the personal relationship, but also politically, it is an issue in some regards that his son may be now pursuing an appeal that is in direct opposition to the policies of what the White House wants to put forward when it comes to gun rights.